My name is Tariq Nabil. I am 28 years old, born into a family where faith was law and obedience was everything. I grew up in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, in a home where every word I spoke, every glance I made, every step I took was measured against the teachings of Islam. From the earliest I can remember, I was told that pleasing Allah was the highest goal, that failure was unforgivable, and even my thoughts had to bend to obedience. I prayed 5 times a day, fasted during Ramadan, memorized surahs, performed ablutions with precision. Yet even as a child, I felt a hollowness I could not explain. There was a quiet hunger inside me, a longing for something real, something I could feel beyond ritual and repetition. I remember sitting on the rooftop at night, staring at the stars, whispering, "Why does my heart feel empty? Why do my prayers feel like nothing?" And no answer came, only the weight of silence pressing on me. My childhood was full of fear, fear of God's wrath, fear of disappointing my parents, fear of a community that prized conformity above conscience. Yet even in that suffocating world, a small part of me longed for freedom, for truth that belonged to me, not dictated by others. It is strange now, remembering how much I trusted the version of God I was taught, while my soul cried for love, for connection, for truth. That quiet rebellion, that secret yearning, would lead me to a moment I could never have imagined, a moment that would change everything. Before I continue, I want to speak to you, the one watching this story. Maybe your heart is searching too. Maybe you have questions you are afraid to ask. If this story reaches you, you consider subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing. Your support helps bring testimonies of hope and awakening to others who feel the same emptiness I once felt. Little did I know that the very things I had been taught to fear, questions, doubts, even defiance, would one day become the doorway to love and freedom I never thought possible. The weight of conformity, the nights spent praying in silence, the constant fear pressing on me. It all seemed unbearable, yet deep inside, something stirred, whispering that there was more, something real, something waiting to be found, and that whisper would not be silenced no matter how hard I tried. It happened during Ramadan, and I could not believe what I saw. Some men in the community had gathered to protest the presence of Christians in our town, and they did something that shook me to my core. They set fire to the Eucharist. Flames devoured the small wafer and the vial of wine, and they shouted in triumph, their faces twisted with anger and hatred. I froze, chest tight, hands trembling, unable to move or look away. How could this be holy? How could this act of destruction, this deliberate humiliation of something sacred to others, be considered devotion to God? I had memorized verses about mercy, compassion, and kindness, yet here was cruelty paraded as righteousness. My mind spun, trying to reconcile the teachings I had followed all my life with what I was witnessing. Every prayer, every ritual, every act of obedience suddenly felt hollow, meaningless. Confusion and rage burned inside me, a storm I could not control. I gripped the railing of the mosque, whispering, "This cannot be your way, Allah. This cannot be you." Flames crackled in the distance, shadows dancing across the walls, mocking everything I had been taught to honor. I could feel my faith, so carefully constructed over decades, fracturing in real time. That night, I walked home alone through the quiet streets, the heat of the day still lingering on my skin, my thoughts racing faster than my feet. Fear and shame pressed on me, but alongside them, something else stirred, a spark of awakening, a flicker of something I had never allowed myself to feel before. I could not go back to the life I had known, the life of blind obedience, because my eyes had been opened, and once they saw the contradiction, the emptiness, I could not ignore it. I spent hours that night on my prayer mat, heart pounding, asking for guidance, or begging for understanding, unsure if anyone, if any God, was listening. But even in that uncertainty, even in that fear, I could feel a presence stirring inside me, urging me to keep asking, to keep seeking, to keep following the whisper that said there was more than this, something real, something loving, something that would fill the hollowness I had carried for all my life. The next days were unbearable. I went through the motions of daily prayers and listened to sermons, nodding along while my mind churned with doubt and fear. Every word of the Imam's speech felt like a challenge, a test of my obedience, and yet inside me the questions would not go away. I kept flashing back to my childhood, to my father praising me for memorizing the Quran, to the Imam smiling approvingly when I followed every rule. And yet I remembered the emptiness that had always been there, the quiet hunger that no ritual could fill. I felt trapped, caught between fear and conscience, between the need to survive and the need to know the truth. My chest ached constantly, my stomach twisted with anxiety, and some nights I could not sleep at all, lying awake listening to the faint sounds of the city outside, wishing for clarity, wishing for peace. I longed for a God who would see me, not just my obedience, a God who could hold my heart without threatening it with punishment. But every time I allowed myself to imagine such a God, the fear returned, the fear of shame, the fear of rejection, the fear of being cut off from my family, my community, everything I had known. I wanted to speak, to confess that I no longer felt the certainty I had been raised with. But my throat tightened, my hands shook, and I stayed silent. I began to realize that obedience without understanding was not faith, it was survival. And yet, the cost of truth was terrifying. I felt utterly alone. I wandered through the streets, praying silently, asking for signs, wondering if it was possible to have a faith that filled the emptiness inside me. Every step I took in the mosque, every bow in prayer, every surah I recited reminded me of what I had learned, but also of what I had never felt. And in the quiet moments when the world went still, a faint voice inside me whispered that there was more than fear, more than ritual, more than the hollow prayers of a life built on obedience. That voice would not stop. It demanded that I pay attention, that I listen, that I seek, and I knew, even then, that my journey had only just begun, that something far beyond what I had known was waiting for me, and it would not let me turn away. One night, exhausted from days of sleepless questioning and silent prayer, I fell asleep on my prayer mat, the heat of the day still clinging to my skin, the weight of fear pressing on my chest. And then I saw him, Jesus, not as a distant figure in history, not as a story I had heard in passing, but as a presence so real it made my heart ache. His eyes were full of a love I had never known, a compassion that seemed to reach into every corner of my soul, touching the parts I had hidden even from myself. I felt his hand reaching for me, not in judgment, not in condemnation, but in invitation, in tenderness. Tariq, he said, his voice gentle yet powerful, echoing inside me. I have been waiting for you. My body shook, my chest tightened, and tears ran down my face as I realized in that instant that everything I had been searching for, everything I had been longing for, had been waiting for me in him. I saw the world differently in that vision. I saw the cruelty, the fear, the oppression, the empty rituals, and I saw a love that was so pure it could not be touched by lies or violence. I felt peace for the first time in my life, an overwhelming serenity that made my heart expand and my soul ache with gratitude. When I woke, my pillow was wet with tears, my body trembling, my mind racing. I sat up, gasping, trying to make sense of what I had seen, trying to reconcile it with everything I had been taught. And yet, deep inside, I knew it was real. And I knew that the love I had glimpsed in that dream was not imagination. It was truth. It was life. I could not ignore it. I spent the entire next day in a daze, remembering every detail, every glance, every word, every sensation, and I felt a stirring inside me that I had never known before, a fire that could not be quenched by fear or shame. I realized that God was not in punishment, not in ritual, not in the violence I had witnessed. God was in love. And for the first time in my life, I wanted Him more than anything, more than safety, more than honor, more than life itself. That vision would haunt me, guide me, and eventually carry me into a journey I had never imagined, a journey toward a truth that would change everything. After that night, I could not stop searching. I began exploring Christianity in secret. As late at night when everyone was asleep, I downloaded Bible apps, read testimonies of ex-Muslims who had found Christ, and watched online church services hidden on my phone. Each story I read felt like a mirror, reflecting the longing I had carried for decades, the emptiness I had never been able to fill with prayers or rituals. I remembered moments from my past when I had cried in desperation, begging for God's presence, feeling invisible and abandoned, and I realized that Jesus had been there all along, even when I did not know His name. Fear was constant, fear of discovery, fear of disgrace, fear of losing my family, my friends, my life as I had known it. Every time I opened a verse in the Bible, my hands shook, my chest ached, but the pull of truth was irresistible. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. I read silently from Matthew 11:28, and my heart broke open. I wept for the first time in years, not for punishment or fear, but for relief, for hope, for the realization that love existed beyond duty and fear. I stayed up for hours, reading, praying, questioning, wondering if it was possible to believe and live without terror, without shame, without the crushing weight of obedience that had haunted me since childhood. And the more I explored, the more I felt alive, as if a new world had opened inside me. It was terrifying, yes, but exhilarating in a way I had never known. I began to understand that faith was not about control, not about fear, not about ritual alone. It was about relationship, about love, about encountering God in a way that touched my soul and healed the wounds I had carried for so long. Every hidden prayer, every whispered question, every secret search brought me closer to a freedom I had only glimpsed in my vision. I knew the risk of discovery was high, but the risk of staying blind, of remaining in a faith that left my heart empty, was far greater. And so I pressed on, trembling, scared, but determined, drawn by a love I could not explain, a love that refused to let me remain lost, a love that had been waiting for me all my life. It didn't take long before my family began to notice the change in me. My demeanor was different, my words carefully measured, my eyes searching for something they could not yet see. One evening, my father cornered me in the living room, his face dark with suspicion, his voice sharp with accusation. "What is happening to you?" he demanded. "You have changed, and this is shameful. Do not bring dishonor to this family. Do not walk the path of disbelief." My chest tightened, my stomach churned, but I could not lie. I wanted to tell him everything, to explain that I had seen Jesus, that I had found a love and truth that filled my soul, but the words stuck in my throat. My mother watched silently, her eyes full of sorrow, my siblings looking down, afraid to speak. Threats and warnings pressed on me from every side, emotional blackmail, reminders of disgrace, whispers of damnation. I felt the weight of guilt pressing on my shoulders, crushing, suffocating, but alongside it, a fire burned inside me, a determination I could not ignore. That night, I knelt on my prayer mat in the darkness, tears soaking my hands, and I begged God for courage, for strength to do what I knew I had to do. Where I realized that the cost of following Christ would be everything I had ever known, everything I had taken for granted, my family's approval, my friends, my sense of safety, but the alternative, a life built on obedience without truth, was unbearable. I felt the battle inside me, fear and love warring in my heart. Every fiber of my being wanted to run back to safety, to hide, to obey without question, but the whisper I had been following for years would not let me turn away. I understood that my choice would be irreversible, that it would shake the foundation of my life, and yet the pull of truth, of love, of freedom in Christ was stronger than fear. I spent the night praying, crying, and steeling myself, knowing that the next step I would take would define the rest of my life, that the moment had come to step out of the shadows, that to choose courage over comfort, faith over fear, and to prepare for the world that awaited me on the other side of obedience and shame. The day came when I could no longer hide who I was or what I believed. I had wrestled with fear and shame for too long, and the whisper inside me had grown into a roar that could not be silenced. I stood before my closest friends, my heart pounding, my hands trembling, and I declared that I followed Jesus. The weight of fear pressed against me, but the moment I spoke the words, something shifted. A heaviness lifted from my chest, replaced by a lightness I had never known. Shame still lingered, and I knew the world would see me differently. But for the first time, I felt free. I began connecting with online Christian communities, fellow believers who understood the cost, who had walked similar paths, as who welcomed me without judgment, without expectation, simply because of grace. For the first time in my life, I experienced true belonging, not because I had performed correctly, not because I had memorized words, but because of love. I spent hours reading scripture, praying in freedom, exploring the teachings that had been hidden from me, and every word seemed to breathe life into the hollows of my soul. I realized that faith was not about obedience or fear, it was about relationship, about encountering God in a way that healed wounds rather than deepened them. My nights were no longer restless. I could sleep knowing that I was seen, known, and loved, yet the cost of this freedom was still present. Friends and family whispered behind my back, glances full of accusation, that reminders that I had turned my back on the life I was raised to honor. But I no longer wavered. I had chosen the cross, and I would not turn away. Every morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I had never felt before. I prayed openly. I worshipped in my heart. I rejoiced in the grace that had found me even when I was lost. The fear remained, yes, but it no longer ruled me. Love ruled me. Truth ruled me. And the more I lived in this freedom, the more I understood that everything I had been taught to fear, the shame, the threats, the isolation, was powerless against the power of a God who loved me beyond measure, a God who would hold me when the world tried to break me, a God who had carried me to this moment and would never let go. The confrontation I had feared finally came. My father and the imam stood in the living room, their faces stern, now their eyes burning with judgment, the air thick with tension. My heart raced, my hands trembled, but I knew this moment could not be avoided. "You will bring dishonor to this family," my father shouted. "You will burn in hell if you persist in this path." The imam's gaze was cold, his words sharp, reminding me of every lesson I had been taught since childhood, of every fear drilled into me, of every consequence promised to the disobedient. And yet I stood firm. My voice shook, my chest ached, but I spoke with a clarity I had never known. I have met Jesus. I have found truth and love that fills my soul. I cannot deny him. I will follow him no matter the cost. Flashbacks assaulted me. The nights on the rooftop, praying in desperation, the burning Eucharist, the vision that had changed everything, the secret searches and hidden prayers. It's every moment leading to this instant, every lesson I had learned, every fear I had carried, every whisper of obedience seemed to crumble under the weight of this truth. I could feel the tension in the room, the weight of expectation and shame pressing against me, yet alongside it a strange calm, a presence that steadied my heart, reminding me that I was not alone. My father's eyes filled with tears, a mixture of sorrow and disbelief, and the Imam left in silence, unable to sway me. I felt the isolation I had anticipated, the loneliness of standing alone against a world that had defined me for 28 years. And yet, I also felt a new strength, a freedom I had never known, the presence of a God who held me, who had walked with me through fear, doubt, and secrecy, and who now stood beside me in this room of confrontation. Every sacrifice, every loss, every tear, and every night spent trembling with questions had led to this moment. I understood fully that the cost of truth was high, that it could fracture relationships, shatter expectations, and leave scars, yet it was a price I would gladly pay, for in standing firm in Christ, I had found something far greater than safety, far greater than comfort, far greater than obedience. I had found life, freedom, and love that would never let me go. After the confrontation, life was not easy, but I felt a peace I had never known. I began building a new spiritual family through online communities and local believers who welcomed me without judgment, who understood the cost of following Christ, who encouraged me when loneliness and fear threatened to overwhelm. Each day, I felt the weight of shame and expectation lift a little more, replaced by the warmth of love and belonging. I spent hours reading the Bible, meditating on verses I had never encountered before, and each word seemed to breathe life into the hollow places of my heart. I reflected on my journey, on the fear, the lies, the pressures, the moments I had questioned whether love or truth even existed, and I realized that God had been with me every step, even when I did not recognize Him. Tears came freely now, not from fear or guilt, but from relief, gratitude, and awe at the grace that had saved me. I began to forgive myself for the years I had lived in emptiness, for the times I had obeyed without knowing, for the nights I had cried in silence. I also began to pray for my family, for my father, my mother, my siblings, and even the Imam, was asking God to soften their hearts, to open their eyes to the truth I had found, to give them peace. I understood that the journey was not only mine, it touched everyone around me, yet it was my path to walk. Each morning, I woke with purpose, no longer bound by fear, no longer a prisoner of expectation, but free to love, free to live, free to serve. I had discovered that faith was not about ritual or punishment, but about relationship, about encountering a God who heals, restores, and redeems. The emptiness that had haunted me since childhood was gone, replaced by a light that could not be dimmed. I felt joy even in hardship, courage even in isolation, hope even in the darkest moments. I knew the journey was ongoing, that challenges would come, that sacrifices were not over, but I no longer feared them. In Jesus, I had found life. I had found love. I had found a home for my soul, and for the first time, I could truly say I was whole, I was free, and I was unshakably His. I want to speak directly to you now. If your heart is searching, if you feel the emptiness I once carried, know that truth and love are real, and courage can set you free. Following Christ is not easy. It may cost relationships, comfort, or safety, but the peace and joy you find are beyond measure. Seek Him, trust Him, and do not be afraid to stand for the truth, even when the world pushes back. Your soul deserves this freedom. And if this testimony moves you, please subscribe, like, comment, and share, so others may hear that hope is possible.